We call this an AnnotatED workshop because there's now a community of many hundreds of people and hundreds of schools that are all engaging with social annotation in a fulsome way. And AnnotatED is our name for that community. And so this is now maybe the sixth time we've done this in partnership with OLC. And I'd like to thank our OLC colleagues for joining us in this workshop. But this, you won't be able to see, you can't even recognize the logos on the slide anymore because they're so small. But this is just a smattering of the representation of the kind of schools that are involved in AnnotatED and doing social annotation kind of for reals at their campuses. I'm assuming that a lot of you in the audience are part of that. I know Jenae is at CSU Sacramento, where she is. And so we welcome all of you, whether you're part of the annotated community yet or not. Hopefully you will be in the future if you're not already. And so as I said before, and our agenda is really these going to be chopped into one quarter, half an hour about Jeremy, leading you through getting us all on the same page about what social annotation is, how Hypothesis works with that, some of the pedagogical and educational affordances it lends us. And then we're going to dive over to the show with Jenae and spend a little time talking with her about her keynote at OLC and her writing and her work at Sacramento State. And then we're going to dive directly into a reading. We're actually going to be quiet for a while and read together and then do some annotation as well during that time. And then probably have quite a conversation on top of that as it moves forward. And I think this is the moment when I finally give it over to Jeremy. And so I will do that now. And without further ado, Dr. Jeremy Dean, my beloved colleague.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks so much. It's great to be here virtually with OLC. Big fan of the organization and had a lot of great connections at previous conferences and hope to be face-to-face sometime in the future. Maybe we're about there. So let me get us on the same page around annotation. I feel a little bit humble doing this because we have an expert in digital reading who's really the marquee event of the show, but I'll do my little thing and then hand it over to Jenae and to all of you to talk about social annotation and digital reading in just a bit. I'm an English professor by training. I taught high school English. I went to grad school for English. I taught literature and composition when I was getting my graduate degree. And well before I ever knew about technologies like Hypothesis, I was obsessed with having my students annotate in their texts for the course. I didn't have much evidence for this except my own experience, but I believe that them annotating the course readings for my course was one of the most critical things they could do to be successful in the class. And so I got in the habit of handing out a poem by Billy Collins on day one of every semester alongside my syllabus. We've all seized the white perimeter as our own and reached for a pen, if only to show we did not just laze in an armchair turning pages. We pressed a thought into the wayside, planted an impression along the verge. And I'd read this to my students and hand it out to try to inspire them to engage more deeply in their readings. It's really neat to see how this quote sort of resonates with a lot of philosophy and educational study these days around social learning and, well, not social learning, but around active learning. We'll get to the social part in just a second. So I'd hand this poem out. Nothing radically new about that. Annotation has been around for centuries, if not earlier. Nate and I sometimes talk about cave painting as kind of one of the original sort of forms of annotation leading up to the chat of this video webinar as another kind of annotation. But in between, the most classic idea of annotation is writing in the margins of books. Scholars and students have done this for centuries to help better comprehend what they're reading, to memorize what they're reading, and to begin to think critically about what they're reading and what they're studying. And one of the really neat things about social annotation is just that it's part of this longer history for a lot of instructors that are new to online learning and new to digital tools and new to digital reading. There's some familiarity in the fact that it's not a brand new way of teaching or learning. It's taking something that's traditional and kind of adding some of the benefits of digital networked spaces to it. And that's what really got me excited about annotation was when I was teaching at UT Austin, where I got my PhD and working in the digital pedagogy lab there, and being introduced to a lot of tools, a lot of that I'll frankly say went over my head. Digital tools like teaching with, Second Life, teaching composition with Second Life. It's a little bit much for me as a rather traditional sort of literary scholar. But as soon as I saw social annotation technology, I got super excited. This was around the same time this article from Chronicle of Higher Education came out by Jennifer Howard in 2012. And there's a line that stuck with me that sort of describes the possibilities of annotation in digital network spaces. I thought she captured it really powerfully when she writes, "Online, a book can be a gathering place, a shared space where readers record their reactions and conversations." And it's really that I feel like Hypothesis is trying to build to, taking annotation from its analog form in books and putting it in digital network spaces where people can annotate and share those annotations together. And so this is our vision of annotation at Hypothesis. Multiple layers of annotation on top of any single document. There can be that layer of private marginal notes. I expect later this afternoon, you guys will be working in the public layer on top of Jenae's writing. But then you can also have private group layers for your course, for small groups within a course, groups for any one of your learning communities, for colleagues in your specialization or colleagues in your office. So the multiple layers of annotation that are shared and private is the vision of Hypothesis and what we've built. There are three major takeaways, and I think Jenae is probably going to go even deeper with this, so I don't want to belabor it too much, but there are three main takeaways that we've gathered from instructors and students using Hypothesis over the years. The first goes back to that nothing new aspect of annotation, that Hypothesis makes reading active, and this is what annotation has always done. And that's what we can continue to do, especially because a lot of times when we're reading online, we don't have a margin like we used to in a paper book. It's on a website where we can't necessarily write, and Hypothesis kind of opens up every website to have that margin like a page that you own and can have in your lap. A neat thing I like to point out on this slide, though, that is kind of new about the ways that Hypothesis makes reading active is that it's not just, scribbles and highlights. You can have images in your annotation, video, actual hyperlinks to other texts to make intertextual connections. And this is powerful in any number of ways. I think when I taught composition, I thought a lot about how we really need to teach students to write for the 21st century, that we need to teach them how to write in online spaces where they might be incorporating images and video. It's not just a 5-page, word process document, that there are other types of products that they're going to need to produce professionally and academically in their lives. And Hypothesis is open to those other modalities. And those other modalities are also important, I think, in terms of allowing different students to express themselves in different ways, and giving students opportunities to express themselves in ways that they're more comfortable with, where they might not have been in traditional academic ways. So I won't go into the anecdote too much, but when I was teaching high school, I used this tool. I used a social annotation tool, and I really found that students who had been quiet, students who hadn't been successful in traditional summative assignments and evaluations, found a niche with Hypothesis, or found a niche with social annotation, because they, had other expertise that they were bringing to the table, and that the tools allowed them to do, enabled them to do. This, I think, is the powerful and radical new thing about social annotation, that Hypothesis makes reading visible. When I told my students to annotate, I really didn't follow up on that. I really graded the summative assignment of an essay. I told them annotation would be good for them, but I didn't teach them how. I didn't check that they did it. I didn't interact with their annotations, obviously. And Hypothesis makes that work visible. It brings that, those steps that students should be taking as they read and they write, and makes them visible to the instructor, makes them visible to the student. You can see, the connection between text and your ideas, just very deliberately. But teachers and classmates can also see those connections that students are making, and give feedback. And this is again and again what teachers say is most powerful about the tools, that they can see that their students have done the reading, but more importantly, they can see that they can see where they're confused and change how they might prepare for class based on those confusions. They can see where students are excited and nurture a certain line of inquiry in a student's reading, writing, and thinking. And then finally, Hypothesis makes reading social. The idea that students can see each other interacting with the text, the idea that they're no longer alone, I think anybody who's gone far enough in school, or really probably everybody's had this experience at school at some point, I imagine, where you felt like you didn't belong. You felt like you're confused. You didn't understand a concept. Maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe I don't belong here. And seeing that that's all part of the game, seeing that other people are asking questions, that other people are confused, learning from other people, really opens up the text to be a space of belonging for students, to feel like they're not alone, that they're working in community, and that other people have similar kinds of struggles, and that they can learn from other people, and that can help them advance in a field of study. So those are the 3 top level takeaways. I want to just say another sort of advantage of Hypothesis is that it's a very simple tool. And I think it's simple for instructors to integrate because, most of you, if you're teachers, assign readings. And this is just something that sits on top of your reading. It's not, a whole new system that you have to introduce, or a whole new platform that you have to orient students to. The reading is the reading, and this adds a layer to the reading. So when Hypothesis is active on a text, you can select text to annotate. You can reply to existing annotations. A lot of folks compare social annotation to the discussion forum as a more authentic way for students to engage in conversation that is actually grounded on course reading and course material rather than in some other place. So replies and discussion is a key part of the tool. And I've already mentioned that you can annotate together in groups, and we do have the ability to annotate together in small groups within a course as well. I think I'm just going to close by saying Hypothesis is available in your LMS. If there are folks here that I saw, folks from Las Positas and University of Washington, where we already have subscriptions in place, and it's great to, I don't know if they were familiar faces, it was going by too quickly in the chat, but it's great to see that we have some partners that are present today. I imagine some of you might be new to Hypothesis, new to social annotation, or your schools might not have piloted with us yet, but we do integrate with the LMS. And have some additional functionality within LMS that you're not going to see when you use Hypothesis, as I like to call it, in the wild today. You're not going to be in the management system. You're going to be using our free web tool. But if you do teach within an LMS, you do teach in an academic institution, this tool integrates pretty seamlessly. Students don't have to create accounts, as we asked you to do earlier. There's much less onboarding. There's integration with the gradebook and other things of that nature that you'd expect from a LTI tool. I'm going to leave it there and actually skip this section because I think my time may be up, and I want to give Jenae and you guys the chance to have the conversation that I expect to be truly wonderful. But I'll just say that if you are interested in learning more about how you can use Hypothesis in the classroom, or how you can get your school involved in our pilot program, I'll drop this in the chat, but you can email education@Hypothesis, and we're standing by to take your call and help you bring social annotation to your classroom in what I believe would be a truly transformative experience for you. So thanks very much.
Before we get actually started in the hands-on activity, I wanted to give Jenae a chance to kind of help situate us in the conversation today. And the way I was thinking about it, and we'll see if she agrees or not, but the way I was thinking of it is, you gave a keynote at OLC Innovate. You wrote a book that was incredibly valuable, an interesting book that's been making a lot of waves. Yeah, hold it up. There it is. Skim Dive Surface. Great title, by the way. And you can see Jenae's background is even based on the cover of her book.
The bottom half of the book.
Yeah, right.
It's the background.
Yeah, you didn't want to go so far as to put the title behind your head.
I thought the more abstract was kind of cool. Yeah. Maybe next time.
It is cool. I like it. We're not, we will be directly engaged with the chapter of the book. That's what we're going to read and annotate together. But I thought, Jenae, you might want to take a few moments to maybe put some context around, there are definitely people here who got a chance to see your keynote. And there are people probably who have already engaged with your book. Can you help us connect the dots between what you were talking about in your keynote and then the book? And maybe we can use that as a kind of segue into the actual reading.
Sure, that's a great idea. So the keynote was titled Imaginative, Strategic, Sustainable. And really the argument I made in that keynote is that the future of online learning needs to be informed by approaches that are well, imaginative, strategic, and sustainable. And I kind of unpacked what those words meant in the keynote, and I'll give the very brief version of that now, which is really, if we're going to move forward with a future of learning that is fully informed by the context of the past couple of years, where we had a massive shift to emergency remote instruction, but also that's really informed by the context of how people live and work so in such integrated ways online today, we have to be willing to align our approaches in higher education with the realities of our context for digital learning, which really does mean thinking a bit outside the box, right? Trying to be willing to understand what kinds of experiences are really transformative for our students, and being willing to imagine digital pedagogies that rise to that challenge of meeting students where they are and really centralizing or focusing on those really transformative experiences. The strategic, insofar as we are incorporating decision makers across the university who are able to align pedagogy and technology effectively. We talked about a couple different frameworks for thinking that through. So if folks want to go in that direction, there is some relevance to that kind of concept of strategy, and especially alignment between technology, pedagogy, and this chapter's focus is really on the ethics of digital reading. And that's a part of being strategic too, right? Is imagining how we make future decisions that are well aligned with the ethical realities of working and being online today. And sustainability to me really refers to our abilities to keep the enterprise of teaching and learning well energized, right, and able to be continued. I think a lot of people felt very depleted in their teaching and learning, especially in the last couple of years. So I was eager to think about approaches to discussing online learning that really recenter our mission, our values, our purpose, that take that step back and help us, again, imagine how can we keep doing what we do while also being more intentional and being more imaginative about what's possible. So that's kind of the keynote in a 3-minute nutshell. I'll put actually the slides to that in the chat. I did make them publicly available. They might be a bit inscrutable as just slides in their own way, but there may be some things you sort of pick up on that are perhaps interesting there. And so in terms of connection to the book, this chapter, well, let me take one step back and say that my book, Skim Dive Surface, is about approaches to teaching digital reading. And it goes through, it starts with the history of sort of reading technologies in higher education. Oh, and thanks, Nate, threw the link to the book in the chat. Buy it from the press if you're going to buy it. Support small presses. So we sort of start with kind of context for histories, feelings around digital reading. We talk about strategies and approaches to doing that in the classroom. And we end by sort of taking a step back and saying, okay, what are the implications of implementing these practices? And that's what we're going to focus on this workshop today. Is actually, we're going to start at the end of the book. We're reading the second to last chapter together because I think it works really well in isolation. And it'll give us, I think, a lot of fruitful launching points around thinking through what are the risks and rewards of reading online and reading publicly. Yes. How's that for a transition?
That was good. You managed to cover both the keynote and the book in just a couple minutes. That was amazing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering too how you see, it hasn't been too long since you've taken your role at Sacramento State, and you have a position there that can probably have some effect on the kinds of things that you were talking about in your keynote. And I'm wondering how you see if this isn't too political, how you see your role as a director there, to be someone who's in a position to, try to move forward on the agenda that you were laying out in the keynote. Is that fraught, or do you find it's a possibility, or what do you say about that?
Well, I'll start by saying I see my role as being a bridge. I think of myself as really bridging multiple parts of the institution from where I sit. I think that we can't talk about technology in isolation, right? It doesn't exist in a vacuum that only a select few can understand, right? It has to be paired with why we work in higher education, right? What what are our goals for our students? What are our goals for faculty success? And so I would like to think in my capacity as kind of that bridge between sort of making sure we have space and infrastructure that makes effective pedagogy possible, and bringing in academic perspectives about why and how we can use technologies for learning responsibly is an important modifier there. I can hopefully start to move the needle a little bit forward, since from where I sit, I'm really engaging a lot with faculty, with administrators, with university leadership, to try and share some of these ideas, to kind of translate them for lots of different kinds of people. It's hard. Change takes a very long time. And I think there's a long ways to go in most higher ed institutions to really think about strategies around implementing technologies for learning in ways that are informed by truly meaningful student-centered practice, that aren't sort of just, there's a lot of reactive technology adoption. I think actually Elizabeth and I were chatting a little bit about that in the chat a bit earlier, even just today. There's an article I wrote in the Chronicle of Higher Education several months ago now about kind of how challenging it is to get decisions made around educational technologies, how challenging it is to have unified vision and leadership and direction about which technologies are chosen and why. Patrick asks old white men. I mean, that might be part of it. There's definitely some like power structures, right, that we have to sort of interrogate and think about in terms of who, how, when, where, and why decisions are made. So I'll do my best, right? And we'll sort of see how the needle moves. But that does take a village, right? And so I'm grateful for those of you who are here to be in this conversation. You know, I'm guessing if you're here, you're a faculty member, maybe you're an instructional designer, maybe you're in a similar role as me, maybe you're a student. But the point is, wherever you sit, the more that we can all kind of keep advocating across the country for practices that are meaningful and that really are engaged with listening directly to pedagogical use cases, while also that are informed, I think, by an understanding of the realities of how higher ed infrastructures are built, how technology infrastructures work. That will allow us all to make better choices, I think. But it is complicated and fraught and very political.
As is everything these days.
As is
right?
everything.
Right. Yeah, especially in education land. Well, I know it at a Hypothesis, you know, we try to, you know, amongst the world of educational technology vendors, we try to negotiate a different pathway than many do along that route too. And I think we've been semi-successful at it. I think that we have definitely tried to focus on acting ethically and acting with kind of student-centered, student-first kind of perspective, and educator first as well. And so I think that what you presented in your keynote and your synopsis here really resonates with us a lot. And one of the reasons why we were so happy to have Jenae here today. You know, I was thinking about, you know, at some point here, we still have an hour and 10 minutes left in our workshop, but at some point we do want to transition over to doing some actual active reading, as we might call it, right? You are the reigning expert of active digital reading, or one of them, we should say, at least.
There's a group, yes.
Yes, we're a group, and I'm sure there are some others here in the audience as well, because there's people here that, you know, we're all peers together. But I was just thinking about how we might start to transition over to the actual reading and annotation itself, and I'm sure you have some ideas on that. So before I let you go, I was just thinking that we might anticipate I wanted to remind people that now would be a good time, if you haven't already done it, to go make yourself a free Hypothesis account. And here is the link to do that. Again, we put it in the chat several times. If you don't already have a Hypothesis account, you can make one. It only takes a couple of minutes to set it up, but it's good to do it in advance, because then sends a message to your email and you have to click OK, whatever. And if you have any troubles with any of that, please say something in chat and Franny will help get you situated by making sure our support folks are being extra responsive to your needs. Yeah, a lot of OM and STEM. That is so true. I like this new acronym, the OM, being one myself as well. Trying to be a good one. So Jenae, when you think about, like, I mean, in a certain sense, all of us here today are kind of your students. We're learners assembled around you or with you. When you think about
With
this
me.
reading with you, yes. When
It's
you think
a flat hierarchy.
yeah, it's a very flat hierarchy.
Yes.
Except only some of us have the cameras and audio, but anyway. So when you think about this reading that you've assigned and how this group of now over 100 other people might get involved in it, how would you think about recommending that people first dive in to this text?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple approaches. So I'll give us two options before we get into the text. One is that as you read, one way to orient yourself, I think, to some digital annotation or any annotation practice is to think about what concepts as you read, what ideas connect to your prior knowledge. We know that new knowledge is actually built best upon things we've learned or understood before. So an exercise that actually I talk about in the book that you could practice here today if you'd like is one I like to call highlight and link, where as you're reading, if you see a sentence that kind of stands out to you, like, oh yeah, that reminds me of my own prior experience, or that reminds me of something else I read somewhere else on the web, or that makes me think of this GIF or this image or this video, you can go ahead and highlight that in the browser. And in your comment, create that link. Maybe it's just a sentence where you tell us what it reminds you of. Maybe you actually put in the link to the thing that you're thinking of that sentence reminded you of. Sometimes that's a good entry point just to kind of orient to your own experience, because sometimes just like, commenting can be very intimidating or overwhelming. If that approach doesn't work for you, if that's not resonating for you, another approach you can do here is to think of it kind of in a heuristical way. Another activity I kind of like is sort of what I call 3-2-1 sort of thinking. And again, this could work online, but it could work equally as well in print, really. Which is like you could kind of try to go through and give yourself a little set number of annotations, right? So it's like, okay, I want to find 3 points that are interesting to me. Just what stands out, what feels unique, what feels weird, whatever, right? Kind of just sort of your gut feeling about that. And you can say, okay, I'll do 3 of those, and I'm going to do 2 moments that are like just confusing to me. Like, I don't know, I just don't get this. I don't understand the sentence. I don't know what she's getting at here. Please do that, by the way, because I love conversations in that respect, right? We can start from a place of like, yay, enthusiasm or confusion, and we'll be equally as productive. And you could just think of like one question, right? Just try to say, okay, as I go through, what's one question I can think of that emerges for me as I approach this moment in the text? And the beauty of doing this digitally, in this case, the social annotation, is if you take one of those prompts in mind for you as an individual, someone else is going to have a similar kind of prompt in mind. And you'll see the thread of responses that'll become very active. And so even if you can't think of a question yourself, maybe someone else's comment, their link to prior knowledge, their moment of confusion, that might trigger a question for you, that might trigger something interesting for you, that might trigger that link for you. So you have a lot of choices once these things start to become very visible in the space. And to make this manageable too, another thing that we might do, I'll invite you to do, is we've got a lot of people here and the text is about 20 pages long. So we could say something, okay, if your last name is like A through F, right? Maybe you focus on pages, like the first couple pages, right? 1 through, or sorry, they're numbered, pages 251 to 255, let's say. And maybe once kind of Nate shows you the screen, I'm happy to share my screen too, if that's easier.
I could do it if you want, unless you'd prefer.
No preference. Maybe why don't you, Nate, just in case you want to show any technical things about using the platform that you think.
Yeah, I was gonna do that in just a second, as soon as you, if you're ready, but if you have anything more to say before we do that.
Oh, Oh, I was just, maybe I'll just finish this thought, which is that,
Yeah.
if we want to chunk it out and not try to like read all of it all at once, right? Some of you might want to start at the beginning. Maybe if your last name is like G through M, you could take the first kind of subsection that starts on page 255. But I don't want to dictate too much of what you're reading here either, because maybe you want to start in the middle, maybe you want to start at the end. So I might encourage you, once Nate shows you the screen and we show you where to go to find this, scroll through, skim it first, kind
There's
of get a sense of what's
there's
there.
a book that has that in the title, isn't there?
Yeah, I know, right? It's crazy. Before you sort of deep dive, right, get a sense of what's there. And then you might find your intervention at that point. Karen's asking how we get to the text, so maybe this is a good time, Nate, to offer that instruction.
Yeah, and so just to remind people, this is chapter 9 from Jenae's Skim Dive Surface book, and there's a link to the bookstore there too. But we're going to read this chapter 9, The Ethical Implications of Digital Reading, Grappling with Digital Archiving, Readerly Privacy, and Evidence of Our Reading. And so this link in the center will lead you directly to an annotatable version of the text. And so I will click on that now and bring it up for myself. And so you should now be seeing it in the page, and I can make it a little bit bigger as well, so folks can see it. If you haven't used Hypothesis before, the way that Hypothesis works, as Jeremy mentioned, is it just adds a new layer to an already existing reading. So in this case, the press has generously enabled Jenae to share chapter 9 publicly with you all so that we can annotate it together. And you can see I've made one annotation on it so far, which is highlighted in yellow here, but also in the upper right, there's these little controls that you wouldn't necessarily find in just a normal PDF. And either by clicking on that, that already existing annotation, or just by clicking open this little tab here with the caret, I can open and close the Hypothesis sidebar. And just as another point, if you find the sidebar to be too narrow or too wide, you can grab that caret and drag it back and forth in order to make it wider or narrower for yourself. I want to draw your attention to one other thing, and that's, you see how there's this little red down arrow up here at the top? That is indicating to me that there have been other annotations added since I opened the page. And so, and it went away. I wonder if somebody added an annotation and then deleted it or something. Oh, there, it appeared again. So now you see like, oh, Jeremy has added an annotation as well. And so if we scroll down in the book, we would also see Jeremy's highlights. And if I click on his highlight, it will lead directly to his annotation. Each annotation consists of an anchor, the portion of the text that was highlighted, as well as the annotation or note itself, like Jeremy has added here. And so each one of these annotations kind of exists as a little tiny web page itself that contains a reference to the original text and what somebody wants to say about it. And as Jenae was indicating, the annotation itself, of course, can contain all sorts of different kinds of information. So for instance, in my annotation at the top, I included a link as one of Jenae's prompts suggested, and that is a link to the actual full book itself in case you wanted to get it from the press. So we see that that little red indicator has jumped open again, and that means, oh, look, there's, so KB Musings, I'm not sure who that is, has put in a new annotation as well. So I can see already people have started on this path. One other further thing I'm going to add here before we maybe be quiet for a while after Jenae has the last word is, if you don't already have a Hypothesis account and want one, you can see in this upper right hand corner, I'm already logged in, so you can see that there's information about my account and so forth here. But if you're not already logged in, you can use this space up here in order to log in or sign up to get a Hypothesis account. I logged out. You can see I can still read public annotations that are being made here, but I'm not able to make any until I actually log in myself and start annotating. So it looks like we've got a couple people, Zach, way up north, a couple folks are already annotating here. I'm going to be quiet there. I haven't been able to see the chat, so I'm not quite sure if people have any questions, but Jenae, are you seeing anything that we need to mention as well?
Not yet. I think, again, I just invite folks, you can start at the beginning if you'd like, but I do encourage if you want to start in the middle. That's also a great place to kind of jump off of. I think we'll probably let you sort of focus and we'll kind of offer some silence here for how long, Nate? What's kind of our time expectation, just so people have kind of a sense?
Yeah, and Julie, we'll get to your question in just a second, but yeah, I'm thinking, what is it? It's a little bit after 2 Pacific right now. So I'm thinking that maybe we could spend, what if say we spend like 15 minutes reading, and then maybe, so we'll go till about, oh, let's make it 2:20 even. Spend some quiet time reading and annotating, and then we'll come back. We'll turn off our mics so we're not bothering you. And then we'll come back and maybe open up some discussion again. But before we go, I see that there are a couple questions here. So yeah, as Jenae said to Lauren, you don't have to annotate publicly. You could annotate yourself. So if one goes in to make an annotation, you have the option to make it private to yourself. So for instance, if I were going to highlight a little bit of text and make an annotation, I have this choice. I can post it to public, or I can post it to only me, which would mean that only I could see it, right? So feel free to annotate privately if you want, but then no one else will be able to see it and engage in conversation. It could be that you also belong to more than one hypothesis group. So right now we're annotating in the public group, which everyone can see, right? You see, I belong to a lot of different groups. So you could too. And so if you are in a different group that doesn't say public, you might want to change that to be public so that you're annotating in a place where everyone else who's here can see it. Yes, you can change the privacy of an existing annotation and toggle it from private to public. I see that, and Jeremy is interacting with with Julie to see if we can fix what she's seeing. Does anybody else have any kind of questions or having any trouble getting started? I forgot to mention one other thing. That's right. We were just focused there for a second on making new root annotations, right? But you can see in Jeremy's annotation that he made, it's already started a little conversation. So the other thing that you can do is, instead of making your own annotation, if you find the annotation that someone else has made, like the one that Jeremy made, a couple of people have replied to it by hitting this reply button. And so that starts a threaded conversation, much like you would see in a discussion forum, based on the top level annotation that Jeremy made in this case. So you have that possibility of either making your own root annotations or responding to other people's. Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and be quiet now, and then we will have a full 15 minutes. If anybody has having any troubles, bring it up in the chat. We'll try to answer it there. And I am going to go ahead and leave my screen up so you can see what I'm annotating, in case you just want to watch somebody do it.
Just wanted to pipe on the mic and say I'm really enjoying reading all these comments and going through them. It's so thoughtful. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Jenae, maybe we'll just jump on a little early. I'm wondering, we're seeing pretty rich activity here. It must be a little bit disconcerting for you as the author of this work to have watch live as people pour over it and read it and ask questions and have dreams about what it could be, and different opinions and so forth. What are you taking away from this experience as an author so far?
This is like a dream, honestly, because you write in a vacuum and you don't know what anyone's thinking as you go, and you kind of wonder, does any of this make sense to anyone but me? I guess we'll find out. So it's nice to to just see kind of thoughts launched, right? Reading and writing their conversations, they're about people. And often we can forget that when we don't see the people associated with the text or we can't hear it. So I'm really enjoying it. What is standing out to me, there's a couple of things thematically that are standing out to me so far. And I think we could, as we're giving folk kind of a couple minutes to sort of wrap up and keep going, maybe we can even point to some of the moments, that have been sort of particularly active in the text here, and kind of we could use this as a focus for a little bit of the conversation here. And thank you for those of you who've been enjoying reading it so far. It's really, it's like such an honor to know that you're enjoying it. One area that seems to be kind of very popular here is sort of the beginning reflection on this sort of moment of just challenges with our own kind of reading practice, challenges with kind of maintaining records or understanding how to kind of organize records of your reading. Yeah, so I was kind of seeing a lot of activity, especially like pages 251 and 252, around challenges of storing and archiving and remembering where things kind of go. So I think, one thing I'm wondering about or thinking about, I like to sort of start with feelings about reading too, because I think they sort of inform a lot of decisions that we make. So I was kind of curious to hear or see a little more about, or take the temperature perhaps on kind of some of these feelings about storing and archiving. I've seen a range of feelings so far in the annotation. Some people saying, yes, I really wish I could store things more. And I saw another question, I have to find who said it, about like, well, do we need to worry about storing these things? Like, does it really matter if we do so, if like the learning happened in the process? So I was curious about what other feelings were kind of coming up for folks as they were thinking about kind of the implications of trying to consider how they keep, store, organize reading and seeing evidence of that.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like there's, at least with this crowd, which is probably a somewhat self-selecting kind of crowd, right? Everyone here is probably an educator in some way. There's a lot of emotions around our relationship to information. We, words like sense of loss, and I know that there's people have also been tossing out different strategies that they use to kind of help keep track of information, whether it's the giant metal filing cabinet in your parents' basement, all the way to the, is it Zettelkasten? Somebody put in a video here, which I thought was something we didn't even talk about how annotations can be multimodal. You can put images and videos and, oh, here we go. So this Zettelkasten is a practice around kind of a very intentional knowledge recording practice. And there are obviously Brianna and maybe others in the crowd are part of that movement. I saw mentions of Evernote, Ego. Obviously, hypothesis is another way to do it. Hey, one thing I forgot to show people is, we've been making these annotations on this very specific document. You may have, if you were watching me do it at all, you noticed I was putting in a tag on my annotations. One thing that you may not know about hypothesis already is that all your annotations, in addition to being able to be visible on top of the document itself, are also available to you in a kind of like combined notebook of all your annotations. And I'm opening up mine here. So what we see here is a kind of search and browse interface for hypothesis. And you can see that mine is filtered down just to show annotations that were made by me. And there are other kinds of filters that you could use. So this is just showing me annotations that I myself have made. And you could also see annotations that I had made if they were public or we belong to the same group. But the cool thing about this is, all the annotations, just talking about putting a pin in knowledge, like you mentioned in your text, all the annotations that I made on your chapter here, Jenae, are collected in this one little area for me. And so I have them here in addition to having them on top of the text itself. And I can always go open that same text directly back from my my overall hypothesis collection. So it can end up being a kind of, a literal way of putting a pin directly in a very discrete point in a text, in addition to also having a further thought about that pin and explaining what it means to you. I wanted to make sure people saw that capability set. I'll pop back to the reading here. Yeah, and B, the fact that comments don't pop up right away. There's something like, in a Google Doc where there's that thing where everybody's editing all at once and you're actually typing on a line and then it moves down the page because someone added something above you, or it just can be very dynamic and it can be very distracting. And so, the fact that you do have to sort of intentionally reload the page in order to see more comments, some people see it as a hindrance, but it could also be a benefit, like you're suggesting. Just also to note, in case people didn't see this functionality, this eyeball control here allows you to toggle on and off the highlights. So let's say that there's a whole bunch of annotations on a document like this, but you want to have a clean read where you're actually not paying attention to all the notes. You can just toggle off the highlights, close the sidebar, and then you're back to a completely clean read of the document. Are you seeing other things in the annotations, Jenae, that are leaping out to you, other patterns?
Yeah. So as we go further down, I'm seeing a kind of different sets of opinions about how we talk about privacy, actually. And this started at the very top, actually with like the title, A Messer. Sorry if I don't know this person's first name. Kind of thinking about kind of the, privacy, reading privacy is referring to kind of the privacy of students' thoughts, right? What they are and aren't willing to share. And later on, I'm seeing other folks kind of grappling with privacy from a different sort of perspective, right? Around the privacy of like, to what extent are your cookies tracking what you're reading and impacting your behavior kind of from an algorithmic perspective. And I'm curious about the extent to which the folks here, like, how do you all think we should be approaching discussions and these sort of expansive notions of privacy with our students? I have a few suggestions in this chapter, of course, but I'd be eager to hear how others are addressing this either in their own classroom practice or with their colleagues, or if you're an instructional designer, if you're more in that kind of space, how you talk to faculty who are making decisions about whether to make certain assignments kind of public or not, online or not, because I know that there's a lot of just different ranges of feelings about that. So
and if someone actually wanted to join us on stage and talk rather than chat, they could. Somebody has something they want to say about Jenae's question, just let us know in the chat and we can bring you up.
I'm seeing your comment here in the chat too, Lisa. That was your comment in the text itself as well. Yeah, they're just that as I was writing this particular chapter, this was like a tough one for me to write. This took me a while because there was so much I wanted to say, and this book was already getting long in the tooth. I had to cut out like a third of this book. So there was just so much that you could say about this topic. So I feel like I sort of struggled to make this as narrow as it could be because there is so much complexity around, like, I mean, we're engaging in social reading right now. This is inherently not a private practice. We're making our thoughts visible and deliberately so. But I think a struggle that I have whenever I implement these kinds of activities or assignments is, what will make it feel safe? What's the value of making the work public? Who can be empowered to engage in that? Who can't be? And what are ways that we can still have reading be digitized, right? Because we know that, some context, of course, is that many students aren't buying textbooks, right? Or they may not be buying ebooks, or excuse me, they might not be buying print books. They may be using ebooks or just using their phones to read, right? So it's like, how do we take advantage of kind of the benefits of the medium, what's available, without making people feel vulnerable or uncomfortable or coerced into making choices that they don't want to make? That's something I think about a lot. And I love your comment here, Lauren, about emphasizing student agency, kind of giving it an opt-in philosophy, giving them some options like choosing a pseudonym, just kind of making these options really clear. I think that's a great approach, Lauren. Appreciate you sharing that.
And Elizabeth, that one thing that I was going to add was another educator who's done a lot of work in this area, Amanda LaCastro, often structures her engagements with students by first annotating in a very closed private space, so that when people, maybe it's their first encounter with group social annotation, and so she has them do that in the context of a private group, like in the learning management system. And then as the academic term progresses, she actually evolves their practice more to an open public annotation sort of framework. And so kind of scaffolding the layers of privacy and agency that they take in how public their work is. And obviously there are still dangers, right? As Alyssa brought up here too, where, yeah, I mean, the online environment is an environment where you can get abused just for being public about almost anything.
And thanks for sharing the resources, Lauren. This is great.
Yeah, the Rebus community does a lot of really great work exploring all the open resources at Rebus is highly advised. Also getting involved in, if you haven't already had a chance to do this and you have free time on your hands, because who doesn't, getting involved with helping to bring some open works to publication, whether by writing or editing or proofreading, or I helped by doing some technical details. There's a lot of ways to get involved, and you actually end up being, you're a public author then. So it's a great way to get involved in that. Just reading more of these comments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Alicia, you're sorry to keep talking, but your comment reminds me that something I'm sure Jenae has addressed too, which is one thing that we do see in annotation as opposed to like live classroom discussion is that it does seem to afford a kind of a more welcoming space or a more open space for different kinds of people to participate. For one thing, the activity, we're doing synchronous annotation right now, which is actually relatively rare. Someone before was saying that they tried it and it actually didn't go well. It is a little disconcerting to sit quietly in a room of other people and all be reading together and yet still having a conversation sort of in the margin. But we have a lot of educators reporting that they see that annotation enables a wide variety of students who might not feel comfortable speaking up live in class, getting more involved in the discussion than they would normally, not only in the annotation, but when they come back to class and are having a face-to-face discussion. The work that happened in the margins can then help make the conversation that happens live more inclusive and valuable.
Yeah, I'm looking for, I'm seeing some other kind of trends here.
Do you want to share your screen instead?
Sure. I'll point out, I'm reading one comment that
I could maybe find it if you tell me you made it.
Yeah, it is from OL Ray. It's on page 264, right before the How We Empower Students header.
I'm sorry, say the name again.
OL Ray.
OL Ray.
Yeah. Yes, this is the comment I'm sort of looking at. OL Ray says, I wonder whether emphasizing the personal responsibility to maintain control over privacy is the only and most effective way at getting at issues of surveillance and educational technology. It seems difficult to get individuals to care. about this. I just think that's a good, and a point that I feel challenged by too, right, is how to make these concepts that might actually seem simultaneously very concrete, but also very abstract, meaningful. Right, because there's some things that are obvious, right? Like, do I make my writing visible in the margins or not? But there's so much about reading online that's not so obvious. Like, why should we care, for example, that if we don't clear our cache regularly, websites can follow us or on the web where we go? And even if you're within, an institutional learning management system, the internet will know if you're a student, for example, and will give you recommendations thereafter. So there's a kind of like tracking mechanism that I think can feel like kind of out of remove from like the kind of space of the classroom. So it's like it's kind of there and it's not there, right? Like it's a pervasive part of this work. And there's another comment that I made about sort of educational technology being inherently tied to the logics of surveillance capitalism, right? So it's like I sort of struggle with how we resist kind of subjecting ourselves to kind of constantly being surveilled while also recognizing that that's part of the web and part of the risk of being on the web. So that's just something I'd be eager to hear if others have thoughts on ways that they get at issues of surveillance in particular.
Yeah, I mean, in reading your chapter, it just conjured up the whole digital literacies practice to me, because there's so much about, forget the subject matter that you're engaged with in teaching and learning. There's so much around how you're going to interact with it in this wild world that we live in, and the tools that you might be using to do that, and how you're going to access it later, and what kind of agency it gives you, and what kind of privacy it affords, and all those different kinds of things, where it's sort of hard to have like a more naive relationship to the material anymore, because it's always embedded in this complex web. Maybe that's always been true, and it's just more surface now. Some good questions. A more practical question here from Kate.
Yeah, for the synchronous annotations, sort of experiencing activity you could do in real time. I mean, I have mixed, whenever I'm assigning reading, I always have mixed feelings about whether to give it like a bound. Like, you have to write a minimum of 3, because sometimes that feels a little bit like it turns it into a compliance task. I'm like, well, okay, I guess I'll do my 3 and then be done. But on the other hand, it does kind of like make the task more manageable, right? Of like, okay, well, I know I have to do these 3, so I'll start there and see where that leads me. So, what I would probably do if I were to create something like this, again, asynchronous to my own students, is I like to do a little bit of like a temperature take, or even like an intake kind of survey with students, different points. Like, hey, what are your prior experiences with reading like? Have you ever done this before? How, do you like to have more time, or do you like to have it be a time-bound task, right? Kind of see like what your students' thoughts are about their comfort level with this kind of work. And that might shape, right, whether you would make it a set number of annotations or whether you keep it more open. So I would say if you had a group of students who were a bit less experienced with the task, maybe a set number would make it feel more manageable. If you had students who had done this or had some exposure to it, you could probably keep it a little bit more open-ended. Because, I mean, here's a perfect example, right? You all are very experienced readers if you're here. And so we're able to keep this task a little bit more open and give you several different options, because we kind of had full faith that you felt comfortable doing it. You probably wouldn't have come here if you didn't. So there's a big difference between kind of you volunteering to be in this space too, writing and thinking and reading with us, and students who, they have to go to your class. They don't have much choice but to engage with the assignment. So it's worth kind of also just, again, checking in as the instructor and acknowledging, hey, I know this is part of the class. Let's see how we can make the most of this for you. I think these kind of social annotation tasks are at the greatest risk of failure if they feel very performative, right? Of like, oh, well, I have to like make the comment that teacher wants me to make. And that's when you get kind of the more like stereotypical like discussion forum kind of responses of like, yes, what Nate said is so interesting. I agree with Nate, right? Which like doesn't really get you very far. So right, so I think making it kind of very clear to students what the purpose of the task is, why they're doing it, and then what the expectations are can make it more successful. Yes, Zach, exactly. Like, well, I'm doing this, because I think my teacher needs to see that I've done it. But I think that also happens if we don't know, we don't have like a way to enter either, right? Like I think if the entry point isn't clear, we also can kind of slide back into let me comment and just say I agree for the sake of agreeing because I'm overwhelmed. So I try to be very empathetic to that challenge.
Yeah, I see some people are having to leave already. Thank you all so much for coming. This whole conversation is really bringing up some great points. I think it is a little disconcerting to read together, because I think we so much think of it as a private act. The actual reading is private. You might discuss it together, but the actual reading is always so private. The nice thing about this is, you can make that collaborative social reading happen without having to be all together in the same place at the same time. So that the kind of strangeness that we're experiencing today may not be the most common way that people read together using social annotation. I don't think you don't have to try to recreate what we've been doing here today in a classroom in order to experience the value of social annotation, in other words.
Yeah, I want to amplify Stephen's response here in the chat, and before going back to the text where I'm missing a couple more things. I just want to say, Stephen, I really like your idea. I mean, it helps. It's great that you're a business law instructor. How convenient. That's a wonderful connection. Yeah, think about actual use cases, make it real, tell stories. I think that's a great approach. The more we can kind of make abstract concepts really concrete through our own experience is a great idea. I would love to know if you bring it into an annotation discussion with your students. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and Stephen, I mean, the opportunity, I think law is one of those areas where social annotation could be most valuable in the law practice as well as in education, because there are so many digital documents in law, right? Where, anything from the Constitution to, to a specific case law or something like that, you've got this document and so much room for interpretation that having a conversation in the margins on top of, legal documents seems like absolutely crucial. There's a fantastic project in Colorado, University of Colorado, Denver, that I'll put a link into, where a teacher and a group of students have been working to bring the right to education into the Colorado State Constitution. That's their project. That's their goal. And of course, in the course of doing it, they ended up annotating many legal documents, but it's both a real world, like let's make something happen in the real world project, in addition to being a digital literacy project and a reading project and a law project and all these different things combined together. I'll find a link to it and put it into the chat.
Let's see. I'm trying to find, there was a comment.
Remember, we can use this search bar up here to search through the annotations if you remember a keyword or anything.
Oh, sure. That is great. Yes. Okay. I found it. So page 270, we're kind of getting into the examples of suggestions for conversations. Yeah, here we go. I developed mindfulness around metadata. And I want to acknowledge there's a few comments here about kind of digital inequities. This is kind of might be sort of overwhelming to teach some of these things. So I think that's a really good point, Leslie. I don't know if Leslie's still here. Because I can appreciate, right, that as an instructor, it's like they're already trying to teach so many different things that like having to then also kind of try and close like digital equity gaps or digital literacy divides, like on top of it all. Like, how do you even have time? How can you do everything? So I guess I want to like maybe make a call out here to, I'm sort of, I wish I mentioned this more in the text. You always regret the things you don't talk about, but like we have a lot of librarians here. I think librarians are a great resource to partner with, especially for this particular point. Like I think instructors should necessarily feel very completely obligated, right, to do it all themselves. I don't think you can do it all yourself. And I think especially this chapter, one reason I chose this for this particular activity was I was, really hoping this would kind of get us into some launching points, what we're doing right now, about how faculty, librarians, IT staff, academic skills coaches, advisors, all these kinds of people are going to help kind of augment this knowledge and maybe make some of these issues visible. So I guess I would encourage like olive branch type of thinking if you're going to be part of helping students develop some of this mindfulness around metadata, or to kind of like, Mark and Zach replies to Leslie, I think are interesting and useful here too, because they do tie in, Zach has a specific suggestion, right, about like, you could create some infrastructure for them as kind of an entry point. Maybe explaining what that structure is could be a good way to do it. And to Mark's point, I think it ties into some of, I think, the existent needs around digital literacy and computer training development too. I'm curious if others have ideas in response to this point about like, hey, if I can't do it all, right, where should I go? What would that look like exactly? It's really tough.
Yeah, the thing that it reminded me of is the domain of one's own project and that work. Have you delved into that, Jenae?
A little bit, but it's a good connection here. It's not addressed in this chapter in any real part of the book. It was a little outside of scope, I think, in terms of like, if you're not familiar, Domains of One's Own is a project where institutions can kind of purchase quite inexpensively some domain sort of space that where students and faculty and staff can kind of plug in content management systems like WordPress or Drupal or Omeka and kind of create their own sort of web properties. It's a great way to kind of learn web authoring and archival skills and databasing skills, perhaps. That's a way to do that with kind of the protection of the institutional licensing without going like all the way into having to purchase a domain, for example. So it's a little outside of scope for this book because, and yes, Mark, it started at University of Mary Washington. Thank you. It's a great project. I really love Reclaim hosting. I just didn't get into it fully because it felt more about kind of content creation than it did about content consumption, which is really the focus of this particular book. But yeah, I mean, this definitely ties together, and I think it's a great way for people to learn.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, one of the takeaways I have from Domain of One's Own is this idea that a domain it gives you a kind of permanent digital place, a sort of home. And the way that you use that and what you put there can evolve over time, right? So as your digital literacy grows or changes, or your focus, whether it's scholarly or professional changes, you can sort of modify that. Like you, Jenae, have a pretty robust website with your own domain. In fact, I have it open right here, and we should make sure that people actually visit it. I'll do.
Yeah, I can put a link in the chat. It needs to be updated.
Sure, we always feel that way, but I don't know.
It's always out of date, but there it is in the chat in case you want to come say hi. I've got a couple recent blog entries for once, so that's exciting.
Yeah. But just the idea that you've created a domain, you own JenaeCohn.net, and then now you are able to have some agency in deciding what's going to be there. You can use it as an archival space. You can do experiments there. I mean, I think that's a very valuable approach to building that kind of literacy.
Absolutely. And to tie into, I mentioned e-portfolios in this chapter too, which a few of you also kind of commented on the annotations right on page 272. Kay mentions an e-portfolio assignment that she's done. Clarissa to kind of pointed out, I think she's gone actually, but pointed out sort of archiving and curating kind of practice as a part of your portfolio. So that's of course really a benefit to a domain, right? You have this opportunity to kind of reclaim evidence of your work, archive it, curate your own thinking. Yeah, portfolio pedagogy is so interesting. There's so much we could talk about there. It was one of these things where it was like a little tangential to this chapter, but I was like, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, because I think that's part of the student agency piece. It's a theme in this chapter that I think a lot of folks have been picking up on in these annotations, right? Is the more that we can empower students, faculty, staff alike, to understand where their ideas are stored, how they're being shared. Yeah, the more they can feel like they are also empowered to learn more, to keep learning, because the web also keeps changing and evolving. Our expectations on what's available and where it's available will continue to grow as well. And yeah,
go ahead.
There's a lot of good assignments being shared in the chat here.
Yeah. Stephen came back with his explicit social annotation assignment for the U.S. Constitution.
How cool.
Oh, Lansing Community College, Leslie. Yes, they do domains of one's own. Heard a lot about that program there. Good to see you in the house.
Yeah, and thanks, Mark, for linking to Able. That's a great organization for people who are doing portfolio pedagogy. Super friendly community. It's a great conference if you have a chance to go or go online.
Yeah, and Salt Lake Community College, one of the largest community colleges in the country, is also one of the most innovative. They've done so much great work in open educational resources, for example. Great people there. I'd always love to visit it. Yeah,
fun fact, this book was initially conceived at Salt Lake Community College.
No way.
Yes, because I was part of a National Endowment for the Humanities Institute in 2018 on the book. It's Material Histories and Digital Futures. Shout out to Melissa Hellquist and Lisa Bickmore, who organized that at Salt Lake Community College. And so there are the acknowledgements for this book. So I got to spend a lot of time there. I was there for a month. As we were like making books and thinking about book history, I like outlined this book because that was my goal. And then she was like, I'm getting a book out. And I did. So it took a while, but it's here. Yay.
Yay.
Academic publishing is slow and long.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you know, the book about digital reading to have like this print object still. But it's nice to be able to, it is available, of course, in digital forms as well. And I'm glad the press was gracious enough to help us make one of the chapters public.
Yeah, that's really great. And I feel like more publishers should do things like that, like, you know, give a taste of the book to the public, enable people to engage in it. And who wouldn't want to buy the book after you've seen how great one of the chapters is, right? You know?
Yeah, a little sneak peek.
A little sneak peek, exactly. Yeah, so just so you know, this this chapter, we will, obviously it'll still be available at this URL that you've been using here today. There's a little bit of dark magic at work in Hypothesis. So this is a PDF originally, right? A PDF of chapter 9 from Jenae's book. Each PDF has a unique digital fingerprint. And the way Hypothesis works, the annotations are tied to that unique digital fingerprint. So actually, no matter where you annotate a copy of this PDF, the annotations will all find each other. It seems almost too hard to believe, but it's really just a simple mapping to that one fingerprint. And so we're going to work to also get it, I think, if you're up for this still, Jenae, more permanently located in your website. So you have kind of a permanent, you know, home for this annotated chapter.
Yes. Yes. So this excerpt, I think without, for whatever reason, the VIA link wasn't working. Nate and I were trying to troubleshoot, but there is actually this excerpt is published on there. We just have to figure out how to make sure the annotation layers sync up. But in case you're wondering, this excerpt does live at this page, and it works with the Chrome extension if you downloaded that, but the VIA link for whatever reason was just not liking it. We can give it another try.
Oh, did you actually put a link in here?
Yeah, if you scroll up,
Oh, sorry.
up. That's okay.
Up, up.
Not down again. It's right in the center. One
right.
further.
Read
an excerpt.
Here we go.
That's the link. Yes.
Yeah, and so just to show here, if I do enable the hypothesis Chrome extension, we should see all the same annotations that we're seeing over where we're annotating it. So this is the dark magic. So even though we're looking at this on a different web server and it's held in a different place, the annotations find it. But it does require to use the Chrome browser and Chrome browser extension here in order to see the annotations, but we'll try to figure that out. You know, I see that we're actually, believe it or not, getting to the end of our time here. And so I wonder, you know, as we sort of bring this to the close, I see there's been lots of great connections going on between people in the chat. That's great. And I really appreciate everybody who's come and contributed their thinking and their annotations. We're up to, let's see, what are we at? 82, it went from 83 to 82. Somebody removed an annotation, which you can always do too. Remember, you can always go back and edit or delete an annotation. So yeah, really rich session today annotating. Jenae, did you have any sort of closing thoughts or ideas that you wanted to walk away with? I am kind of curious, like if you were going to go, let's say there's a second edition of Skim Dive Surface, would you feel like you would come back to these annotations for your revision of chapter 9?
Oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, the more conversation, you know, the more that people sort of read and comment, right, the more ideas that kind of spiral out. I think I particularly appreciate the comments about kind of connecting to the real conditions, right, of students where they are. A lot of, I think, great themes I saw emerge about how we support marginalized students in particular and what that looks like. I think would be great to kind of call out more explicitly if I could kind of go back or create a version 2. And to also kind of be more transparent and pragmatic about what exactly these approaches could look like in partnership with the rest of the university campus is something I'd like to, of course, update. And I think this chapter, you know, speaks to very current issues around how archiving works right now. But I think these things are going to change in different ways. So it's like this chapter, in a way, another reason I chose is I kind of knew it would keep evolving, right? I think, and that at this point in time, we may have different connections to make than we might make in 2 months from now, depending on what kind of happens in the world and with how information is stored or secured. So I just want to underscore the gratitude for your attention, your care, your reading. There are a bunch of other comments that had questions that I'll try to respond to asynchronously as well, and you'll get a little ping on that from me. And I'd very happy to keep engaging with you if you're curious to talk more or do more work on this. I'll put my contact information over in the chat. You're welcome to find me on Twitter is a great place. I'm quite active there. I'm very active on LinkedIn too if you're there, as well as, you know, via email. So I'll put all those channels to reach me in the chat. You got feedback, right, on just like, how did it feel to read this chapter? How did it work? Like, yeah, I'm happy to hear that feedback directly, share with other folks. I'm in touch with the OLC people too. So don't be shy about that.
Is anybody saying anything else other than that? So many things to take away. Oh, MB, I'm glad you found it a good introduction because we didn't actually focus too much on introducing it. So that's great. Well, thank you so much, Jenae. I really appreciate your being willing to do this even after all the work that you put into OLC and other venues. So thank you. It was awesome, and look forward to even going back over the annotations even more and reading them all in depth.
Me too. I'm excited. It's like a little goodie bag of ideas. So thank you for putting some virtual party favors inside of our digital goodie bag. I don't know why like these little like rat hands are my gesture for that.
Yeah, no, that's the
internet. Imagine like a little like fun size candy in a bag.
It's like hanging ornaments or something like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes. Thank you, everyone. Really nice to meet you all. Stay in touch.